All right, so we're recording now. Before I get started with the Q&A, I got a couple of questions by email and on Canvas, which I'll answer, and then I'll open it up for general questions. A couple of announcements first. Don't forget about Tuesdays. Class will be by Zoom, and we have a guest lecturer. And for you on-campus students, attendance is required, and hopefully you will also ask questions. So make sure that you attend that. And second announcement is I have a request to extend the due date for case study 4 because of overlap with some assignments for some undergraduates in other classes. Who even knew you guys took other classes besides mine? So I'm happy to do that, but as I say, as I will indicate when I put an announcement on Canvas, it will overlap with case study 5. So case study 5, as I announced, is going to be assigned Tuesday. And so if I extend the case study 4, those two are going to overlap, and I can't extend 5 because it's already due on the last day of class. So I'm happy to extend it, but just be aware that there will be an overlap. Okay, let's see here. Let me share my screen, and then we'll get going. Screen. I should see my screen now. Let's see. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see here. Get my windows all straight here. There we go. Okay. So first question again has to do with implementing order prioritization and then tiebreaker rules. And I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes talking about this. We talked about it in class a bit, and it's also in one of the examples, but it's an important concept for case study 4, and it's also going to be an important concept for case study 5. So I thought I would spend just a couple of minutes going back over that. So what you see here is one of my models. I'm not exactly sure which one this is, some variant of the Hobby Electronics. And so I'm going to talk about it with respect to a server, even though with our implementation, we do the same thing at the transfer nodes, but it's easy to talk about conceptually from a server. So basically, when we think about what happens is we have entities that arrive and they get in this queue, and then when there's capacity in the server, they come out of the queue and enter into service. And so the two things that we're interested in there in terms of prioritization are the queue ranking rule and the dynamic selection rule. And the queue ranking rule determines when entities arrive, where they're placed inside the queue relative to other entities. And so the default's first come, first serve. So they just line up like you would, basically anywhere, like you go to a restaurant or something like that. It's first come, first serve. But there are other ranking rules you can have, like earliest due date or priority and things like that. And so that ranking rule determines where they enter, where they're placed in the queue. The selection rule, on the other hand, determines when there's capacity allocated, which one do you select from among those that are waiting. So think about having a queue of entities waiting for a symbol 1 here, and the symbol 1 becomes available. Which one do you select? And so the dynamic selection rule implements that. So if you don't have a dynamic selection rule, then obviously the the queue ranking rule will override that. And so for our problem, as you know, I asked you to do several different dispatching and prioritization strategies. And so to me, the easiest way to implement this is, you can see in mine, I'm using oops, I didn't click there. I'm using this global selection rule that I demonstrated in the video module. And so you can see I have a standard dispatching rule property called a global selection rule. And then if you open that dialog box, you can see I've just got three priorities here, like largest priority value, earliest due date, and least setup time. And so these are going to be evaluated sequentially. So it's going to take the largest priority value, and if there's a unique one, it'll get routed first. If there's not a unique one, it will then compare due dates. If there's a unique one now, it will get selected. If there are multiple ones with the same due date, then it will pick the least setup time, and so on. So it goes down this list, however long the list is. If they're still tied at the end, then it's going to go by the queue ranking rule. So that's really kind of the strategy there. And so the way I have this one set up right now, as you can see right now, is I have the largest priority value. And so we have entity priorities in my model. I have the entity priority, right, which is set to 2. And then when I read it in from the table, if I determine if it's an XYZ module or an ABC, I just change the priority. So this is what I demonstrated, I think last week in the Q&A. And so if you look at my on arrivals add-on process, I'm just making the decision, which one is it? Is it ABC? If so, it follows this path. And I do two things. First is I set that module class. Again, we talked about this last time, so they can differentiate between these two classes of modules, but I also assign the priority. So in my case, I'm assigning priority ABC a value of 1 and priority XYZ a priority 2. And so if I look at my global selection rule as it is, the highest priority is largest, or the highest, the first one in the group box is largest priority value. So that's prioritizing the XYZ order. So if you go look at my planning tab, I guess I haven't done this in a while, so let me just rerun the plan. And I don't remember which data set I have here. Let's just run the plan. What we expect to see is all the OEM orders first, right? It's all the XYZ, because we named the XYZ orders OEM, and the other ones, we just use the order nomenclature. And so you can see that it prioritized all of those first. If I go back to my facility and then just say, well, let's just flip this order and say, instead of doing largest priority value first, let's do smallest priority value first. So now we're going to prioritize the regular orders. Let's just go take a quick run at that and create plan. And now you can see it just flipped all of the OEM orders to the end and all of the non-OEM orders to the front. And so that simple prioritization made that change. If I want to see what happens when I do due dates, I would just move the due date to the top and so on. So when I talk about primary priority and secondary priority and tertiary priority, that's really how you do it, is with this repeat group. I implemented the global dispatching rule, but you can also implement them directly on the individual transfer nodes. So my transfer node on Kit, for example, you can see that I'm using the global selection rule, but I could always override that. So I can go in here and say, I don't want to use the global selection rule. I want to use a different set and specify by transfer node if you want to do that. Okay. Does that make sense? Anybody have any follow-up questions on that topic for me? Okay, onward we go. For question 4, tracking material blockage, I'm still not 100% sure what you were expecting. Could you please clarify again what you're expecting outputs here? So I answered this one on Canvas in the discussion forum, but I decided I would spend a few minutes talking about that. So let me go back to my Simio model here. And so how material blocking works is, if you go to one of our transfer nodes here, we have right here under route constraint logic, we have this bill of materials constraint. And so the bill of materials constraint logic, let's see here, right here, bill of materials constraint logic is just saying that you are going to force the entity to wait at the transfer node if the materials aren't available. So when an order gets to Kit, for example, let's say it's an order for module A, the system's going to look at the inventories of component A, component B, component C, and make sure that you have sufficient quantities to meet the bill of materials. And if it does, it's going to transfer that to Kit. Otherwise, it's just going to sit in the routing out queue here and let other entities possibly pass it. Okay, and so my questioning is about, well, what happened? I mean, so that's bad, right? So if you don't have enough inventory and entities are waiting, that's a potentially bad situation. And so what I'm asking in this metric is for you to come up with a way to measure that. And so if you look at go look at the planning tab, for example, if I just go look at the constraint log, so oops, here's my constraint log. I can see these, we've seen this before. If I just go to constraint type and say, well, I just looked at the material availability constraint. Right. And so these are all of the times where an entity was blocked by that constraint on bill of material. So all of these are situations where they're blocked because of material constraints. So if you look at this order 79, for example, you can see when the blockage started, when the blockage ended, and you can see the duration of the blockage. So this was a pretty long blockage. 113.25 hours was the blockage just on order 79. And so then if I go back and say, well, let's just assume that we have, infinite availability on everything. Get them all here. And those things are hard to click. And then go rerun. So let me go back in and go to my planning tab and create plan. Now all of those went away. So now I still have my constraint log filtered. It's filtered to material constraints, but there aren't any. So by assuming that we had infinite availability, we've eliminated all those constraints. So what I'm looking for you to do is say, okay, this is important to me, is Albi Electronics, to know what the magnitude of my material blockage constraints, what is the magnitude, how bad is it? And I want you to come up with a way to measure that, right? That's the whole idea, is that you say, what can a metric be so that I can measure that material blockage, so that if I change the prioritization, or if I were to change my material arrival strategy, which we're not dealing with material arrival strategy, we give that to you, but if you did have control of that, how would you change it to improve the situation where you didn't have material blockages? And so the goal here is to say, I understand what material blockage is. It means an entity is waiting for a material on its bill of materials, and that material is not available. For the case study, I told you that our replenishment strategy would guarantee that eventually all the materials will be available. So you should never have any non-shipped orders. It's just some of them are going to have been blocked by that material availability. So what I'm looking for you is looking for you to do is come up with some way to measure that, and then ideally put that on a dashboard or something like that so that you can measure it. And so you put that in with the metrics that I've asked you to report for each scenario. There are 3 specific metrics that we've seen: make span, just a number; utilizations of each station, which we talked about in class on Tuesday. Again, just numbers. If you use the scheduled utilization. Order fill rate, again, easy, number of on-time orders divided by orders completed. So I want this 4th metric so that we can look at a scenario and you're essentially assessing the quality of the scenario. So I run the scenario, with the default dispatching rules. I run the scenario with earliest due date, for example, and I want to look at, I want to say which one is the better run, which one performs better. And these 4 metrics are what I want you to use to make that determination. Okay. Have any follow-up questions for me on that one?
So as I understand, it could be either the duration of the blockage or how many orders are going to be blocked, right? Both would be fine, for example.
That's what I want you to tell me.
Okay.
The whole idea is, the whole idea here is, again, that you understand what the situation is. You see the log, you can see how to, you can see what information we have. And what we're trying to do is boil down the run into a number, a single number, or a single 2 numbers, or a single metric, so that we can compare scenarios with one another. Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other follow-ups on that one? Okay, so let's see here. I think I got one more. Okay, so the 4th one, actually, I answered this one on Canvas too, but I thought I would go ahead and talk about it just a little bit also. This one says, create your own dashboards, include the 4th thing that Albi Electronics is interested in knowing, or do we do these plus 2 extra dashboards? So basically you have to do 2 custom dashboards as part of the assignment. And so the easiest way, or the most efficient way, is to make one of those 2 dashboards to be something that you use to evaluate the scenarios, right? So again, I told you I want you to report these 4 metrics for each of the cases, and there are 2 cases there, and we provided 2 scenarios and 3 or 4 different cases. So you're going to do, a fair number of runs to report all of those values. And so ideally you would have a dashboard that helps you to do that, right? So you have a dashboard where you can just run the plan and then record the metrics, and then make the change, run the plan, record the metrics. So ideally you would have something that's going to help you in that experimentation. That's not a requirement. I'm not saying that one of your 2 dashboards have to do that, or that even one of them has to have all of the metrics. It's just ideally that's the whole purpose of using a dashboard, is so it provides meaningful information in a concise and kind of easy to use way. Okay. So what we're looking for here, as I said, and this also folds into the extra credit that I did, is that I want you to come up with, what would you want to know? So you put yourself in the shoes of the Obby electronics people. What would you want to know? We get a whole lot of information from the model. We can go, inquire from the pivot grid. We can look at, other results from, within the output tables and all of that stuff. But what is it that you would want to know that could be presented in dashboard form? That's what I'm after. Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I got. Yeah, that's all the questions I got. So at this point, I am happy to open it up and answer whatever other questions you guys have.
I do have a question about implementing the packaging in Assemble.
Okay.
So I remember in class, you mentioned it, that we have to change the auto cancel trigger. Instead of having to cancel all the image activities, we should go for none. But I think that's the case only if we have the packing in between process and finish, right?
Yeah, it depends on where you put it. Depends on where you put the packaging. If there are no tasks that follow that in your task sequence, then it doesn't matter.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. Okay.
It doesn't matter at all. If you put it there. So the auto cancel trigger, what that does is if you have a sequence of tasks, let's say my task sequence is, I don't know, 5 tasks in sequence, right? In serial form. And one of them is conditional. Let's say the second one is conditional. Well, what the auto cancel trigger does is by default, it's set to true. It's set to all immediate predecessors cancel. If your second task didn't execute, so the condition for its execution wasn't met, then none of the subsequent tasks would execute. If that's not what you want, if what you want is to just that particular task to be conditional, then you have to reset the auto cancel trigger. And I was saying that happened to me in my testing, is that I didn't do that. And I don't think it was packaging where it came into play. It was a different case that came into play, but I had to figure it out from looking at the Gantt chart.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Nothing at all? Okay, that is all I have. As I said, please don't forget about Tuesday's class. Make sure you come, make sure you're ready to ask questions. His talk will be non-technical, but if you're interested at all in this kind of work and Industry 4.0 and enterprise systems and where this kind of technology fits in, I think you will find the talk interesting. So thank you very much, and I will see everybody on Tuesday. As I said, I'm going to extend the due date for homework for case study 4, but if you've already got it done, or if you've already got a path to have it done, go ahead and submit it, because I'm going to assign case study 5 on Tuesday. All right, thank you. Mehmet, are you still staying on?
Yeah.
Okay, just hang on.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the recording here.